when I first had my son, I felt like, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I want. And the more I realize is like, I was in that goop phase. And right now it's like, I am building those wings and reshaping who I am and what I am and taking flight into something new. And it's going to look different than it did before, but it's going to be beautiful.
Right. Hello and welcome to the And Both podcast. Here we are going to hear from moms and those in motherhood that are doing the thing that works for them. They are honoring themselves alongside the all-encompassing role and level of expectation that is motherhood. And we are going to hear from as many different people as possible in their own experience. So you can find people to relate to. You can hear stories that will make you laugh, make you cry, all of the above, and that we will come together as a community to support one another in a way that is holistic and honoring of the woman and the mother as a whole. Welcome to the And Both podcast. And today I have my very first guest, which I am so excited about. This is Rachel Mae from Mama's Cup of Ambition. And she is here to talk all things motherhood and all of the other facets of herself. So welcome, Rachel. Thank you for being here. So I wanted to start off with you sort of introducing yourself, talking a little bit about yourself and whatever you want the people to know.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I want to say, first of all, I'm so excited and honored that I am your first podcast guest. Obviously, I'm a podcast host and I am obsessed with podcasts, and I'm such an advocate and cheerleader for new podcasts. And it's always exciting to see new shows coming out that I know I'm going to be able to binge listen to. So I'm really excited for this show. I'm Rachel Mae. I am a mama of two. I've got two little boys. And before becoming a mama, I had a career as a country singer-songwriter. I lived in Nashville for a bit and really kind of went all in on having a career as a musician. I'm the daughter of a blues musician, so I kind of grew up around music and just knew from a very young age that that was something that I really deeply connected with, and music was always just sort of this comfort for me. And so I really went after that as a career and kind of put off having kids because I was fed this line that, having kids would mean the death of my career. And so I just turned 41 and I have two toddlers. So I got started a lot later in life having my babies. And now I'm kind of in this like in between, right? Of seeing if I can have and both. Like, can I be mama? And were they right? Did that really mean the death of my career? Or can I sort of like reimagine what my identity is? And so I host a podcast called Mama's Cup of Ambition. And that's sort of the place where I show up to talk about that with other mamas who are exploring their big dreams and ambitions with little kids in tow. So in a nutshell, that's me.
I love it. So the premise for the show, I know I've talked a little bit about it in the past, is that the idea is that that line, exactly what you're speaking to, is like, you can do all the things that you want and be all the things and launch that career and yada, yada. But as soon as you have kids, that stuff is sort of all supposed to just fall by the wayside. And like your one solid responsibility, goal, marker for success is this role of motherhood. And I think for so long, we've been evolving in the transition away from that. Like, think about a few generations ago, it's like you've got people that are getting married at 18 and having babies. So that essentially is your career development, or your expected career development. Yeah. And now people are getting married later. People are having kids later. People are not having 8 kids as a norm, or 6 kids as a norm. I have to be careful on how big family I go because I have 4. So I still run into people who are like, what are you doing? I'm like, it's great. I love it. But I think that what is happening is that there's just sort of this like growing seed that one generation is passing on to the next about how our eyes are open to the fact that like we're not just all running in service of like this one tunnel where everything else gets blocked out.
Right.
But I think too, and so we all individually realize that, right? Like you realize individually after your kids are born, like, oh wait, I still want to do music.
Yeah.
I still want to do, I still want to start my own business. I still want to have a podcast. I still want to do all of those things.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to want to do that? Because that's, a lot of societal pressure and nuances. Yeah. And if I do want that, how do I make that happen? Because the world is not set up in this way.
Yeah. Yeah. So. I feel that on a soul level. I feel like as somebody who's always been or very much identified as someone who is super ambitious and just like, if I have an idea, I will just like jump and start and figure out the details later. And having kids definitely shook all of that up in a great way, but also in some like really hard ways where like now I have to be a lot more calculated. I can't just sort of run into the fire and see what happens because I've got 2 tiny humans who are relying on me. And there is a lot of assumed responsibility. I'm very thankful to have a partner who shares the weight of a lot of the responsibilities, but I'm also somebody who likes to be very independent and just kind of do things on my own. And so I feel like motherhood has kind of forced me to, one, learn how to ask for help, and I say that fully knowing I'm a work in progress. I am still not very good at asking for help, but also feeling like I have to ask for permission, which is something that I really buck up against because it's like, I want to just do the things that light me up. Like I want to start a podcast. I want to just like clear my schedule and do the thing, or I want to make music. I want to just be able to like clear my schedule and run in that direction. And so really realizing that I don't believe that those record execs were right when they said that having a family would be the death of my career. I don't believe that, but I also recognize it is very different now. And just kind of reckoning with that is it's this metamorphosis, right? It's you, when your children are born, the version of yourself that you were is reborn into something else, and really trying to reconcile what that looks like and to not resist it, or to I feel like sometimes too, we hear this like, be a boss babe and do all the things. And then I identify with that sometimes, like, yeah, I am ambitious. I want to do all these things. And then sometimes I feel this really strong pull of like, but I want to be in my motherhood era. And what does that mean about me if I lean more into this like nurturing mother side of myself? Like, how do I find that balance? So I love that you're honoring and holding space for this conversation, because I think I know this isn't something unique to me. I know this is something that as parents and caretakers, this is something that we all experience. And I think it's a really important conversation to have, and that that sort of lifts the veil and makes you realize this is not, I'm not broken, and there's not something that I need to fix. My identity, that's kind of how I felt when I first stepped into motherhood, was like, well, who am I now? I used to know exactly how to sum up my like little bio in an elevator pitch. I could do it right away. And now it's like everything feels just sort of fluid and different, and that's okay. And I'm so not alone in that process. And I think when I was first experiencing it, I really did feel very alone in it. And I thought, this is just a me thing. Everybody else must have it figured out. And what I'm starting to realize is like, oh no, we're all just trying to figure this out together.
No one has it figured out. Spoiler alert, no one has it figured out. And I think that's the problem, right? Is like, that's where we get siloed as moms
Yeah.
in things. Like we live in such a connected world, but no one's really connected anymore. Like
Mm.
you go on social media and it's everyone's highlight reel. So you're like, I'm having a terrible day. Everybody else on here has like matching outfits and a
Yeah.
vacation and like this deluxe birthday party situation, and you're like, I couldn't even begin to think of what picture I would put on the internet
Yeah.
of like myself right now or my life or whatever. And I think that that's, if we only ever just show up with like the prom dress on,
Yeah.
we're just kicking this down the line. And what I kind of came up against, I guess, visualizing wise, is like, when you're at a bowling alley and like people are just learning how to bowl, so they put the bumpers up.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like sometimes, and it may sound weird, but like the kids, when you have kids, they are the bumpers, and that doesn't mean that you can't bowl anymore.
Right.
It just means that you can't skip over to like 3 lanes over, which is, ideal. But
Yeah.
like you're in a track now. You're in a track and you're going towards the same goals as you were going towards before,
Yeah.
but you can't sort of go sideways and do that.
Yeah.
And
I love
maybe
that
that just
visual.
speaks to my bowling skills
I love that
more than
visual.
anything.
And you know what? I'm like such an awful bowler. Even before kids, like I needed those those bumpers. But I can totally see that visual of like, you're so right. It's like before there was freedom of like, I could get bored with the bowling and be like, I'm going to go to that air hockey table back there.
Right.
Do that.
Right.
And that trying to just sort of like reconcile the fact that like it looks different, but that doesn't mean that you can't still expand into those things that are calling you. It just has a different a different aesthetic for a while.
Exactly. And I think too, like the stuff that, when you speak to like the social media part or the, meeting with other people part, is like, we still only really have these conversations about motherhood. Like when we
Yeah.
meet with other moms, we have these conversations about motherhood. And
Yeah.
so if we don't have these conversations about like music,
Right.
if you don't have these conversations about music, you're not really like working on preventing the atrophy of that muscle in you.
Right. Yeah.
And so creating spaces where, you can do those things. It's like I would go out for dinner with people that we all had kids, and everyone would say, I'm so glad to be here. But then all we would do is talk about kids. And I remember sitting at the table being like, I talk to my kids. I talk about my kids. That's all I do. But like, is this all I'm supposed to do?
Right.
And so it's just this weird, like, is this thing on kind of feeling that happens.
Yeah. And I think there really is something to, I'm experiencing this right now, actually, because so for me, music is like, it's a part of my essence, right? It's a part of my like authenticity. And I've sort of put it on the back burner, and I knew I was going to be putting it on the back burner for a moment, like to start a family, because for so long it was the reverse. I had my family on the back burner and I put off having kids. And when I decided, I really want to start a family, like I recognized that I could still experience music in some ways, but the way, like, I'm not having a band right now. I'm not going out and playing gigs at these bar rooms the way I used to.
Right.
I'm definitely not touring right now. And so just recognizing that it was going to look different. And so I sort of put it on the back burner. But I think there's really something that happens where now I'm kind of at this place where my kids are getting to be to the age where they still very much need me. Like I've got a 3.5-year-old and an 18-month-old. So they still very much need me for everything. And I'm at home with them. And so I'm in the thick of it, right? But also, I'm recognizing, like every once in a while, I think, well, maybe music was just something that I did, and maybe that's not something I do anymore. Like maybe that was just a season, and I can feel okay with how I used to create music. But then I pick up my guitar, or I hear a song, and something like in the deepest part of my soul is just like screaming, like this is not something you can detach from. It's a part of you. And so for me right now, it's just finding this, giving myself space, which is so incredibly hard with tiny humans at home, to like, I can't just sit down and like ruminate on writing a song the way that I used to be able to. But it's not just that I'm up against. What I'm realizing that I'm up against is that the further away I get from doing those things, like you're saying, of flexing those muscles and being around other musicians and talking about music and writing music and performing music, the further away I get from that, the harder it's getting to get the courage to jump back in, because there's all of this fear and resistance that comes up of like, you're so different now. Like, what are you going to sing about? What are you going to talk about? Are you even going to know how to do that anymore? And so I'm bucking up against this, like, not only the actual demands of motherhood that are real and are a part of my everyday life, but also this fear cropping up to say, like, I don't know if you know how to do that anymore. It's been so long. And then this part of me that's saying, you have to do this. This is a part of who you are. You have to find a way to incorporate it. So it's this weird swirling of all of these different elements in my life. And I'm having to really find a way to, like, right now, that for me looks like, no, I can't just tuck away and go on like a songwriting retreat right now, because that's not a part of my story at this moment. However, I can pick up my guitar and play, say, like, I'm going to play a 2 songs, and usually 2 songs will turn into like a whole living room set. And then I feel in that moment, like, I remember playing those songs. I feel connected to that part of me that is me. And also, like, my kids see it, and we've got multiple guitars sitting in my living room. So my kids will grab their guitars or they're dancing, and it's like, I don't have to separate myself from them to do this. I can do it with them in tow. And in fact, that's how I grew up. My dad is a blues musician. He was playing, and I remember going to his rehearsals. He was doing the thing with me watching. And I think that heavily influenced my love for music and how I got to this as well. So I think giving ourselves permission to say, like, maybe I can't do it exactly how I used to, but how can I step into this right now so that I can feel that connection and just little by little keep growing and expanding that space to allow myself to have the part of me that exists, and also to not feel like I have to do it separate from my kids completely. Like, they're allowed to see it, and I'm allowed to claim that space and to say, hey, mama's going to play her guitar right now, and I'm going to sing because I really love that. And then when we're done, like, we can go do whatever you guys want to do, but
then we'll have snacks.
Right. Because it's like, it's also like claiming that's exactly it, because it's like, as soon as I pick up the guitar, like, you can bet all of a sudden there's a whole like menagerie of needs that crop up, that everybody needs something from me. And so, but I recognize that also as resistance. And it's like, it's okay for me to say, like, hey, this is what I need, not just on a like, hey, mama needs a shower. Like, yes, I need those things. Mama needs nutritious food, but I also need creativity in my life. And I need a way to express myself and to be anchored into the things that make me feel the most like myself. And I think giving ourselves permission to do that, even if it's not exactly how you think it's supposed to look or how it used to look, is such a freeing thing. And it helps to kind of shorten the curve of, well, do I step into this? I'm getting like more and more afraid of it the further away I get from it. And so it's like keeping yourself sort of anchored into it. So when you are ready, or you do have the space to fully jump back in whatever way that looks for you, that it's not like you're coming back after being completely removed from something. Because I think that just feels so much more terrifying.
Right. It's like you're not learning how to play the guitar again. You're on a pause, or you're like in the slow lane versus, being on the highway.
In a way, it's like all those years of playing bar rooms and having like somebody drunk coming up to me, like yelling out, "Play Sweet Home Alabama." Like that, it's like in a lot of ways that kind of primed me for having toddlers, because it's like, I'm playing in a living room.
Goldfish.
It's just like different requests, play Old MacDonald Had a Farm, but it's like, it's the same thing. So all of those years of playing those like dive bars kind of primed me for having to be able to like not get distracted by all of it. So there's always a through line there, right? Like, your experiences before kids prepare you and set you up for those experiences with kids.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, sometimes it's easy to say, like, I don't it would be so much harder for me to try and pursue the thing that I want to do right now. So I'll just wait and I'll just wait and I'll just wait. And then that just adds on. But then also one thing that I try and remind myself is like, if I don't show my kids what it looks like to pursue my thing, then I am doing my part to perpetuate that you have to be lost completely. You have to be, it's not even lost. You have to opt to just be in motherhood above all else, you know? So I just went to New York City. I just got back a couple days ago from my first trade show, summer market. There's many,
amazing,
whatever we're calling it, large trade show where I'm launching wholesale and retail distribution for the planning products that I make.
Yeah.
And I was getting ready to go and my kids were all like, Mom, I don't want you to go. Like, I've never left for 5 days, and my oldest is 10. And so I've never been gone for 5 days.
Yeah.
And they were all really like not having a great time with it. And I said to my daughter the night before I left, I said, I can't tell you to chase your dreams, and I can't tell you to do the thing that makes you happy and to do the thing that fulfills you and to do, to sort of like dream big and go in pursuit and walk towards and all of that and not do it myself. 100%. Because you have to show people through your own actions what you mean. And you have to show your children what that is, because it is really easy to say, be all that you can be and do all of the things and, be fearless and yada. And even that, like the boss babe stuff, like even that.
Yeah.
But if you don't actually do the thing, then it's just another infomercial.
Totally. And I think there's a point where I don't want my kids when they're older to look at my life and to be like, wow, Mom was doing all of these things. Look at all of the things she was going after and doing all of this stuff. And then she had us and everything stopped. And I don't ever want them to wonder, like if I decide to walk away from one of my ambitions or pivot to something else, like that's fully on me. I don't ever want them to think that like motherhood caused me to abandon my dreams and parts of myself and that it's because of them. Like I want them to see that I may be reconnecting with those things and finding parts of myself in a different way. But I'm doing that for me. And like you're saying, also so that they will see. And I'm just able to show up more fully when I have those moments. I can tell when I've not been doing anything to sort of ground myself in the parts of me that yes, like being a mom, that is a part of me and it's a part of me that I love, but there are so many other facets. And when I'm not doing something to sort of ground into those other facets of myself, I am cranky. I am a short fuse. Like everything bugs me. I feel like I'm so overloaded by all of the sensory of the house.
Yes.
Like I have no patience. I don't want to play and build blocks or Legos, where when I even just have an opportunity to like pull back and record a podcast and I have a conversation where I'm not being interrupted. Like yesterday, my husband and I were trying to talk and my son, he's like literally standing there going, Mom, it's like on repeat. I'm like, hold on, babe. We're trying to have a conversation here. And it's like my husband and I are learning how to like talk over this just constant noise. And I recognize too, like my husband has ADHD. And so like his capacity to be able to really focus in on a conversation when there's a lot going on is like pretty much impossible. And I can see him like really trying to listen to me and also scan the room of like, what, like, how do we put the like mute button on this kid?
As there's a toddler flying.
Yes. And it's like, so being able to like pull away from that for a minute and have a conversation like this that's not interrupted. When I go back out and rejoin my family today, I'm going to be so much more available and the better version of myself. When I sit down for a minute and play my guitar or listen to something that like inspires me or step away from the house and have an experience where I get to be a version of myself, I return to my family. a much better, more present mom and partner and all of the things that I aspire to be. And it's like, not only am I showing them through my actions what it means to go after your dreams, but also that, like, one of my ambitions is to be a very present and patient mother. And I can't be that if I'm not pouring those same things into myself. If I don't mother myself in the way that I mother them, like, I make sure that they have stimulating activities and things that get them into like a artistic creative state, and that they have nutritious food to eat, and that they're getting enough sleep. And I don't do all of it perfect by any means, but like, I'm really aware of all of their needs and I'm always trying to meet them. I need those things too. And so it's not selfish for me to claim that space,
take care of yourself.
Yeah, to mother myself the way that I mother my family. And that's really been something that I have had to sort of start to rewire in my mind, because I tend to put myself just at the very bottom of the totem pole, as I think so many of us mothers do, because we're like, well, we think there's like this elusive moment where everything is going to like mellow out. Like, once I get everybody else's needs taken care of, then I will take time to go after whatever it is that's calling me. And it's like, guess what? It just gets busier. There is never that calm moment where you're just going to be like, now I have all of this space to come in. Something else will fill that space if you don't claim it. And so
you have
that's been a real challenge for me. And it is still a real challenge for me to recognize I have to take that space and not feel guilty about it, and not expect that some like vortex is going to open and I'm just going to suddenly have a free day.
18 hours.
Yeah, it just doesn't happen. And so that's, I think, has been a real struggle for me, and a real, just something that I'm really trying to work on and to establish for myself. And I love hearing how other folks are doing it, because I feel like I don't have it dialed in, and I don't do it perfectly, but I feel like the more that we speak about this and share our true desires and the things that we are craving and trying, the more it frees up all of us collectively to claim that for ourselves. And I think that's really important. Like, we don't have the village that maybe everyone talks about or existed at some point in time, but we do have the ability to lift each other up collectively by being honest and transparent about what we're struggling with and what we're craving, and by just starting to stake a claim on a piece of it.
Right.
If and I think it makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. And I think also the thing that people, maybe one of the touch points is like, a lot of times people, like, they prescribe your needs to you. And so like right now you have kids. My youngest is 3 now. So when my kids were little, you know, like at the beginning of the pandemic, I had a newborn and a 2-year-old, and I had kids in early elementary school. My needs to like feel tethered to planet Earth were very different than they are now. You know, like, it's when you've got kids that are under 2, you're talking about more of those physical, like, I need to shower, I need to feed myself, I need to like, I need to not be cleaning bottles or, you know, any of that, like the things that you do sort of on that hamster wheel of life at that point in time, that's where you step away from. But I think that what people do is they say, like, they just blanket it. And motherhood is so multifaceted that like, if you're, you know, one of your kids is brand new, well, I guess brand new is a bad idea because they generally sleep all day for the first little bit, but you know, when you've got kids that they're trying to learn how to nap during the day in their crib, you're not going to be like doing your best Dolly Parton in the middle of the living room. Nope. Right. So it's like, shoot yourself in the foot. Yeah. But so like, how do you honor that side of you? So maybe like, that's different. Maybe that's more like lyrics. Maybe that's more whatever, however that all works. And I think that we still get hung up on this idea of like doing things right and doing things wrong, and how we need to, it's like we need to have this fully fleshed out, fully formed idea about exactly what this means to us before we get started on it.
Right.
right? It's like we have to know exactly how we're going to like fill our own cup.
Yeah.
And I just think that's like, that also speaks to, you know, you're saying like the more you get away from the intensity that you had with country music before you had kids, it's like it feels scary to jump back in. But then we also do that to ourselves when it comes to like taking care of ourselves. Like
Yeah.
this whole marketing thing about self-care being bubble baths and stuff like that
Right.
just drives me up the wall, because I'm like, there's no, like, the equivalent of that is not a 4-hour golf game. Like it's
Right.
not there is no equivalency in any of these things. And so if you don't have, you need that open space. So you don't need like prescribed space. You need open space to be like, all right, I'm going to pause for a minute and I'm going to like think about what I actually want to do. If
Yeah.
that's a shower, good for you. If that's writing a song, even better. If that's like laying on the floor in a full out starfish, like
Yeah.
tether away. But it's just this idea that like we have to have this group project fully fleshed out before we're able to like take that space.
Yeah. I
And I
think
think
too,
that's
like,
hard.
it's interesting as you're talking about like the nap time, because I feel like for me in the very beginning, it was like, okay, my son is napping. How productive can I be right now? What can I
Mm-hmm.
do? And in my like mom brain, I'm like looking around the house and I'm like, okay, well, I should do the dishes, but then maybe I should take a shower. Like you start going through, like, I have this little window of time where hopefully he's going to sleep.
Yeah.
Maybe he's going to wake up, but what should I do first? And feeling like, oh, but I need to be creative. And it's like, you're trying to like force something or turn it on when really like, maybe what I need is just some quiet spaciousness or to just sit down. But it feels so counterintuitive to rest, because I feel like there's also this narrative of like, you can do it all and you can be a
Yeah.
mompreneur and you can hustle and have the babies. And like, there's a certain part of that that I really, that resonates with me, because I do want to do all kinds of things, but also what's the cost of that, and how do you like give yourself clearance to just be like, actually, maybe it's a lot of pressure to put on myself to try to be so productive and to have it all like mapped out. Because whenever I've tried to do that during nap times and say like, this is what I'm going to accomplish while my kid's napping, more often than not, that's when they don't nap the full amount of time that they normally would.
Or at all.
And then I feel frustrated and irritated. I'm like annoyed with them because they're waking up, and it's like my expectation of what I can accomplish in that window of time. It's like, if you have spaciousness somewhere else in your schedule, and this is where I think like it's so vital to have partnership with whoever it is that you're raising children with, where like you both have time carved out that's just for you, that's not crammed into the expectation of like, my kid's gonna sleep. Like I've found
Yeah.
when I'm trying to like cram my like quote unquote self-care or creativity or whatever else I'm trying to do into nap time, and inevitably like it goes sideways, and then I'm frustrated, and it's like not good for anyone. Versus when I know I have a time and space where I'm like, hey, I'm going to be recording podcasts, or I'm going to be sitting down to like work on some music or do whatever it is that I need to do, and I need you to handle everything with the kids. Like just assume that like I'm off the clock for a minute. I again, like I am able to then come to that time more freely and return back to my mom role in a much more expanded way and so much more grounded. And I feel like the times where my husband and I both have that working, where we're both getting that, it's
Yeah.
so magical. And I feel like we kind of do it for a cycle or a season, and then we sort of fall off because again, things happen. Somebody will get sick or something, some new element in our schedule changes, and like we have to sort of recalibrate. And I can really tell when I'm getting away from having my basic needs met, that I just start to feel like this low grade anxiety and just sort of frustration. Like everything sets me off. And it's like,
Yeah.
I feel like if you recognize that and can really like kind of keep coming back, it's like you have to keep advocating for yourself to have that time. And there's a part
Right.
of me that wishes I didn't have to. Like I just want it to be a given that like, of course I'll have time to do the things that I need to do and want to do. But the truth is, like, we have to continually recalibrate and advocate for that to be a part of our existence so that it doesn't just fall by the wayside. Because, right, like once kids get into school, then there's like a whole other host of responsibilities and things that fall onto
and emails.
emails.
I'm getting all my back to school emails right now. I'm like, I have so much homework and I don't even go to school anymore.
Oh God, I'm not there yet. And I've heard about it. And I just like, it's like mentally gearing up for it. But it's like, that's why, like what we kind of touched on this before, of like, you think that there will be this point where all of a sudden the schedule's just going to free up, but it just changes into different priorities and different like demands and needs. And so advocating for that time and that space and trying to not just like squeeze it into those moments that are so unpredictable, because you just like, having kids, it's such an unpredictable thing. Like you cannot, and I think that's part of it too that's really been a challenge for me, is letting it exist that, hey, I can make a good plan and try to assume that like I'm going to have all of these boxes ticked, but then you never know what's going to happen in motherhood and with children. And so you have to just also be like flexible and unattached to the outcome. And so trying to find that, like, I don't know if balance is the right word, but finding that middle ground where you are advocating for your needs and also like giving yourself a little bit of grace and flexibility, that sometimes the best laid plans are just going to go sideways.
Yeah, I heard that. Was it that Ali Wong comedian? She was talking about saying it takes so little for a dad to be considered a good dad, and it takes so little for a mom to be considered a crappy mom. And it's just like, I think that's the crux right there, right? Is like somebody gets sick, you're like, well, that's me. Or like something happens, you're like, well, that's me. And so like we take that, even if you make that time, that's the first thing that would get carved into. And it's like, how do you put concrete around that?
Right.
So that you can still say, okay, I still need this time. I mean, and I don't mean concrete like time, like Tuesday at 2, whatever. But I think like the podcast, I love the example of the podcast because it's like there are hard boundaries around it, right? Like your kids can't be sitting on your lap because someone is there, and that creates this space where you're like, okay, no, we are gonna, like, this is happening. I have like made an appointment. I have done this, yada yada. And there is a difference in knowing that you can't be interrupted, because you always have people flexing into your space, and people flexing into your time, and you're like, why is my boundary made out of Play-Doh, but everyone else's boundary is made out of titanium?
Yeah, I know. And we saw that so much, right? In the pandemic, it was like, who was carrying the weight of most of that when all of a sudden kids were homeschooling and there was so much. It was like we saw moms leaving the workforce in droves, right? Because it was just sort of like expected that like this is going to fall on your plate. And that's not to like say that the dads and the men didn't step up, but there was definitely a disparity there in how the load was distributed, and things in service of family typically tend to fall on mom's plate. And you're right, like that is the first thing to go. If you've got that little space carved out for taking care of yourself or doing something for you, it's like, well, that's the disposable thing. Like that's the thing that we can just like scoot off to the side and fill that space with something else. And again, like I've said it how many times in this, but like now all of a sudden then I'm not showing up in the way that I want to, because I'm on edge and I'm crabby and everything bothers me. And then I, like, for me personally, I can't say that this is everybody's experience, but I know for me, like then in those moments when my needs aren't being met and I'm a short fuse and I'm like snapping at my kids and then repairing, and I feel like I'm repairing all the time. And like, it's like,
and that's even worse, right? You've like doubled down.
Yeah.
Like you're like apologizing for apologize.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm Canadian, so we apologize over everything. It's just a reflex. And so it's like, I apologize for my apology. Like,
Yes.
oh my God.
And then it's like, even after I'm like repairing with my kid, I'm like,
but you still
in
haven't met that need.
cycle. Right. And now I'm just like, I haven't met the need. And now I'm in shame. And I'm like, God, I'm snapping at my kids and I'm snapping at everyone around me. And I'm snapping at myself because I'm like, you should be like able to take a deep breath and regulate your emotions better. And it's like, it just isn't no good for anyone. And yet,
don't you wish you had like Brene Brown on speed dial then? It'd be like, hey, listen, I need someone to put a directional on for me because I'm in a spiral.
Yes. And
I'm dizzy.
I will say, like, I'm getting a lot better at catching those moments and recognizing them. And you mentioned Brene Brown, and one of the things that I love that she always says is like, the story I'm telling myself is, and being able to sort of like pull back from those moments and be like, okay, what's really going on here? Like, what's at the root of this? Like, yes, I just snapped at my kid and now I feel awful and they feel awful. And we've repaired and we've had a moment and like tried to center, and now they seem okay, but I'm still dysregulated because now I feel in shame. Like, what is happening here and why am I so off kilter? What is happening? And when you pull back and you keep pulling back, it almost always is because I'm running on empty, and that's not sustainable. And so it's like, we think about this with like our phones. We plug our phones in and we let them charge up, right? And if we don't, like, when the battery dies, that's it. You can't force it to charge faster. You have to wait for it to recharge. But most often, like, we let it charge up before it gets to dead battery. At least for me, I hate the dead battery, so I'm always plugging that sucker in. But it's like, for ourselves, it's the same way. Like, we also need moments to recharge and build our energy back up. We can't just keep going. And if we would let ourselves burn out to that point where it's a dead battery, like, it's a longer wait time before you're back in the game. And it's like, it's just over time that's going to be harder on the battery, right? And the phone's going to suffer for it. And the same thing is true for us. And I know it's so much easier said than done, but it's like, it's so important for us to recognize, like, when we have those moments where things feel like they're imploding or exploding around us, that it's not because we're bad parents. Like, more likely it's that, like, you're not having a need met that is a core need that you're probably making sure your children are having met, and trying to dial back into that it's critical. It's a really important piece of the experience of motherhood. And something like, we didn't have to do that so much, right? When we didn't have kids, it's like you would still, your body would tell you, especially boundaries and stuff with work, if you were burning out. But I feel like even more so now, when you've got children who are depending on you and they're expecting you to show up, and their needs don't just stop because you're burnt out. Like, it's not like, oh, mom's having a hard day today, and now all of a sudden nobody needs something from me. Like, that just doesn't happen. And so preserving that energy. Yeah, it would be awesome if you could just sort of pause things for a second. But
it's hard. I think too, there's a lot of things that came about from the pandemic, right? Like, pointing out, that how much of it got shouldered onto moms. Like, millions of moms left the workforce. Millions of moms have not returned to the workforce because of many reasons, and I think that as we get farther away from it, like, the immediate effects are brutal for women and mothers. But I think the farther we get away from it, that we may realize that this is a more of a catalyst for change than what we originally thought. Like, I can't imagine going back to that time, but also I can't imagine that so many people, like, the veil got ripped off, right? It's like you've said we can do it all kind of thing. Like, you can be anything. You can, like, have the business and the kids and the this and the.
Yeah.
But what that really means is you're doing it all. And if you're doing it all, that's not really it. That's that's the infomercial, not the lived experience. And I think that being in having the pandemic experience, no matter what it was like, oh, I'm realizing that like this is on me to do.
Yeah.
Like if school calls and it's canceled, like this is coming into my world. And how do we start from that serious mismatch in
Yeah.
what we're being sold and what is our actual experience? And it's that stuff, right? Like, you can start a podcast, you
Yeah.
can have a music career, you can, you can, but how are you going to have the scaffolding in place to make that happen? And we all
Right.
just realize that there is no scaffolding. There is no
Exactly.
village.
Yeah.
I mean, even if you have family that is supportive and involved and all of that stuff, it's still falling on your shoulders
Yeah.
to line it all up, to do all the things and all of that. And so I think that in the long run, it will be a good thing, like for our children's generation,
Yeah.
if we model, having choices for ourselves, not necessarily to say you have to own your own business or you have to have an enormous podcast or you have to have this like Grammy winning music career in
Yeah.
order to be doing it the right way, in order to be like the ultimate parent or mom or whatever. It's that you are still taking the time to honor those pieces of yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that when we show our kids that once they get to that age of having their own families, that hopefully my hope is that they will say, like you're saying, like my mom had this music career and then she had kids. And because she was raising us and, my parents had kids, everything kind of slows down
Yeah.
so that they could do the thing that they wanted to do, but it didn't stop. It
Right.
wasn't like, the end of days. It was, she made different choices, but she continued to honor herself and she continued to be true to herself and she continued to move forward in a way that was fulfilling and made her feel like a whole person so that she was able to fully show up and be who she wanted to be with us. And
Yeah.
instead of being distracted, instead of having that space where you're saying, sorry guys, but like I really wanted to record something today and nobody had a nap and yada yada yada. And it's just you're showing them what it means to do the and both.
Yeah. Yeah. I think something that's really been on my mind a lot lately is, and I think this paints just like the most beautiful visual. So, like, we all know about caterpillars and the chrysalis, and the caterpillar turns into the butterfly. And something that I have been really ruminating on a lot lately is that, like, what happens in that chrysalis is very similar to what happens in motherhood. That when the caterpillar forms into that chrysalis, right, it's like, it's dark and it's like closed off and almost sort of isolated from the world, right? And what happens in there is like the caterpillar basically turns into goop. Like it just is
Yeah.
mush in there. And everything has to sort of fall apart and dissolve. The existence and the physical body of what existed before, all of the things that the caterpillar embodied, kind of have to like break apart, become this like pile of goop. And then it has to be resculpted and formed into what becomes the butterfly and has the wings to fly and go and explore the world in a whole different way and see it from a whole different viewpoint. And I think there's a beautiful like juxtaposition there of motherhood, that like when your children are born, you have that chrysalis moment where maybe you feel a little isolated and you're in identity loss and you feel like your time is not your own anymore and everything just sort of feels like goop. And if you recognize that, like, you can stay in that goop and you can let it just stay sort of like in pieces, or you can take that time in that goop and let it form into something new and not be afraid of the places that it's going to take you, that the view may be different, and let it take you to that new place. What can come out of that chrysalis is beautiful and amazing and has a whole new vantage point. And I think that's something, the visual of that for me in motherhood, I feel like when I first had my son, I felt like, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I want. And the more I realize is like, I was in that goop phase. And right now it's like, I am building those wings and reshaping who I am and what I am and taking flight into something new. And it's going to look different than it did before, but it's going to be beautiful.
Right.
And it's going to be like, if I allow myself permission to become and transform into something different, it doesn't mean that like the pieces of that caterpillar, that pieces of your former self, they're still a part of there, right? Those cells are still in the makeup of the butterfly, but it just takes a different form. And I think motherhood is very much the same thing of like our cells of who we were before, they still exist. Those pieces of us are still there. We just have to reshape them into something different so that they can still exist out in the world. And I think that for me is the work right now of like recognizing that I kind of had to be like broken apart and melted down to turn into something new. But I didn't lose all of that when I stepped into motherhood. But I need to have permission to fly. If that's sort of like the visual for me.
Yeah. And I think too, like, I mean, you can't ask a butterfly, but if you could ask a butterfly, do you think any butterfly would be like, man, I'd love to be a caterpillar again?
Right.
Right? Like, do you think like after you can fly and after you can do all the things and you are like up and mobile, are you ever like, man, you might want to have those parts like, I can go and lay under a leaf and no one's gonna like eat me, or you know, whatever. We can go down the very hungry caterpillar route pretty quickly on this. I'm well versed in that.
Same. That's probably why I have this like this in my mind. It's like I'm reading these children's books and I'm like, I was that caterpillar.
You're like, this is profound. I got pregnant
and I ate all of that food. I went into the chrysalis, turned into mush.
Yeah. You're like, wait a minute. This is philosophical. Like, there might be 17 pages in this book, but this is deep.
It's deep, yeah. It's like, but you're so right. Yeah. Like, you're right. We can't ask the butterfly, but like, we can ask the parent, like, I wouldn't go back. I love this, like, as crazy and chaotic and hard as it is sometimes. Man, do I love being a mom, and man, do I love the person that it has made me. Like, I am so much clearer now on what matters to me and what doesn't. My BS threshold is so low. Like, I just don't have the time for it anymore. And I can attribute that directly to motherhood. And I wouldn't want to go back in time and not have this experience. So I think you're totally right about that. Like, it's hard when you're going through it and everything feels sort of mush or goopy, but when you come out the other side, and that, I think that for anyone listening to who may be in that goopy phase right now, trust and know that there is another side and that it is that metamorphosis. It takes time, but there is another side, and you don't have to just abandon everything that existed within you before. It can just take new form.
Yeah, and I think too the time is really the key in all of it, is that, you know, you didn't become somebody different. You're just built differently with the same parts. Totally. So, you know, all of the things that you wanted before, for whatever reason you wanted them, it may change. Your priorities may change, and what you value may change, but it doesn't mean that you want any less for anything. And it's okay, I think too, like, that's I mean, I think, you know, I still have high heels from when I was 20. Am I going to wear them? Never again. But my kids wear them. My kids wear them around the house and they think it's fun. And they're like, Mom, you wore these? And I'm like, yes. As I slip into my well-worn Birkenstocks, I'm like, that was many times ago, many, many years ago. But I think too, like, that's the other part, is like, we don't give ourselves the time ever, because we are always in that be productive, you know, have all the things, have a plan, move forward, yada, yada. Like, everything has to happen at this lightning speed. And you're going, it's like driving down the highway with no directions. Like you don't know where you're supposed to get off on the exit that's going to take you to the place you want to go if you don't slow down and look around at the signs.
Yeah.
If you don't, have some sort of general idea about where you're going. And I think that, for you driving down the highway, there's exit ramps that are music, and there's exit ramps that are podcasting, and there's exit ramps I'm not going to write your exit ramps for you, but just to speak to like the things that you value and that you see along the way, maybe it means that you circle back, or maybe it means that you just keep on driving and you move on to the next thing, but that we have to give ourselves the time and the space to make that, to be able to make those changes and to be able to figure out where we're meant to be instead of being told where we're supposed to be.
Yeah. And that
makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And there is spaciousness that needs to happen there, right? Like it's okay to still want those things and to desire those things that you desired before having children. And it's okay if it doesn't all take shape right away. I feel like there's sort of this feeling of like, okay, like the baby's here and I found my groove, and now like, okay, now what? Like, what do I need to do? And we want to try to hurry the process. And it's like, I think this kind of comes back to what we were talking about before, of finding ways to sort of anchor in so that you still have a connection and a through line to those things. Find a way to still have those pieces of you anchored in some way. Like I was saying, for me, it's playing my guitar. Even just if I can, sometimes like I joke that it turns into the living room set, but sometimes I can only really play like one song or a half a song. But even just giving myself permission to do just that kind of keeps me anchored in and connected to that. And I think if we can find a way to have those little moments that keep us connected to those things so that we remember, because I do feel like sometimes in the blur of motherhood, it can be really easy to sort of forget. And I did this with music a little bit, of stuffing it down and thinking, I guess that was just something I did in the past. And then realizing like, no, you can't disconnect. It's like somebody telling me, don't use your legs. Like, okay, I mean, I could be down with laying in bed and watching Netflix all day for a while. I could have everybody bringing me stuff. I could lean into that in a hard way. But at some point, I could go all in. Like, that sounds pretty great, actually. But if my legs still function, at some point, I'm going to want to get up and move around. I'm going to want to go outside and get some fresh air and go for a walk. I'm going to want to dance. I'm going to want to do all the things that my legs allow me to do. And I feel like for me, it's like trying to just say like, well, I don't do music anymore. It's like, I can pretend that I don't care about that, or I don't have that ability, or that that's not a part of me anymore.
Right.
But it creeps up at the most inconvenient moments. When I'm trying to stuff it down, it'll just come like right up into my consciousness of like, you can't ignore this forever. And it's
like, just I feel a tune coming on. Yes. You're like, listen, I've got stuff to do.
It comes up at the most inconvenient times. And it honestly, it's the most when I am ignoring it or choosing to ignore it, and it'll creep up and I have the strongest, biggest emotional reaction to it that feels like a deep sadness. It's like ignoring a part of yourself. It feels like ignoring one of your children. It's like, hey, like I'm still here and I still need to be loved and expressed and seen. And it really like, I think just so finding those ways where you can just have that through line and that connection, even if it doesn't look the way that it used to, I think it's such a powerful thing to help you stay connected to it, so that when you do have a little bit more spaciousness and you do sort of come out of that chrysalis, that you're not just starting at zero again and trying to like reconnect to it all over again, because I feel like that feels really overwhelming and daunting. And like we were saying, it's like the further away you get from it, the harder it is to step back in.
Yeah. And I think I agree. I think the, when you've like had a new baby, I mean, there's goop, right? So physical and metaphorical goop. But when you've had a baby, it's this idea, like even when you leave the hospital, like, people are talking about bouncing back and like all this stuff is like, you're supposed to want to do that. And and I think we run into that so much is like, all going into the hospital or going into labor and delivery, you're like, okay, I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to go back to doing these things. But you don't realize that you're going down an evolutionary path of
Right.
yourself. And so if we don't create space for people to say, I still am who I am. However, the shuffle of things for me has changed.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the siloing starts, is when people say like, well, I still have these things that I want to do and I still have these things that are important. And everyone says, but you're a mom now.
Yeah.
So you have to like put all that on the back burner, because as soon as you bring something in, that detracts from your ability to be a good mom.
Yeah.
And so creating the space where we say every single person goes through some sort of personal evolution.
Yeah.
once you bring another human into the world.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that you have to be like a Jekyll and Hyde of yourself. That just means that, again, your priorities are going to get shuffled, your timelines are going to get rearranged and things like that. And that the more that we can create space for that to happen, I think that's where we're going to get more authenticity around the transition to motherhood. And that's where we're going to get people who say, this was really hard for me. This isn't how I thought it was going to be. And then that's where we can build community, and that's where we can build connection. And that's where we can sit at dinner with our friends and say, I really like to do this before. And not everything has to have that, I love my kids, caveat beforehand. Right. It's like that's a given in many of these conversations. When we feel like we have to say that, I feel like we're putting up the little, like, the crossing guard before your feelings walk across the crosswalk. It's like, still love my kids. However, this is like what is going on in my brain right now. And we got to get rid of the crossing guard, because we can't keep separating these two things, because you're not pulling from your ability to be a good mom or to do what you want to do as a mom in order to honor yourself. You're actually doing the opposite. You are honoring yourself, and you are doing the things that light you up and that fill you up, and that bring you this sense of groundedness and this sense of peace and this sense of calm, so that you are able to take that and pour it into being a good mom.
Yeah. So well said. I completely agree. That's so well said. I love the visual of the crossing guard, because that's exactly it. Like, and we all do that, right? Like we all do it because we're so afraid to admit. It's like we feel ourselves. Like that one thing cancels the other out. Like, obviously we love being moms. Obviously we had families, we had multiple children, like clearly we're loving being moms. So I love that visual of the crossing guard, because it doesn't cancel it out. Like, you're allowed to have those desires and those ambitions and those dreams and things that make you feel like yourself. Those two things can coexist together, and there can be duality there, that you can be a whole person and also be a mother.
Yes.
And that's always going to be a part of you, but it doesn't make you love your children any less if you love yourself as well.
Mm-hmm. I said this probably, I don't know how many years ago it was, but I said to my husband, I said, do you know how much easier my life would be if I didn't want to be a whole person? Like, if I just wanted to take all of that energy and all of that, the planning and the thinking and stuff like that, and pour it straight into just being a mom, do you know how much easier my life would be? Like, it feels like you swim against the tide when you say, I want to start my own business. I want to start a podcast. I want to like do all of those things. It's like, people are like, well, wouldn't it be better if you just waited? And I'm like, it would be easier for sure. But at the end of it, who is the person that's spending all this time with my children? And like, we've got to fill that bucket so that is the person that you want going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's worth saying here too, that I recognize as well that ambition has so many different forms, and our dreams and goals look different. And it's also fulfilling and well to say, like, I want to be like, all I've ever wanted is to be a mom, and I want to be like the mom who's doing all of the crafts and doing all of the activities and doing all of the things, like that's amazing, and lean into that. But that's also a form of your self-expression.
Right.
If that's your desire, that's also a part of your self-expression. And I think we collectively need to just like hold space for all of us, that however you express your core essence is okay. And we can hold space for each other in that. But like, you want to go and build a business or like start a podcast or make a music career, do whatever it is, like do that. You want to be the mom who's like crafting and making all of the Pinterest worthy things, go all in, do what feels good and right for you, and allow yourself to express the things that light you up in an authentic way, because that either way, like that is how you as a person get to move through this world, not just as a parent, but as a fully formed person who has their own desires and dreams and hopes and goals, and they both can exist. And we don't need to throw up the crossing guard to say like, I love my kids, but whatever, just do what feels good to you. And I think so often we tend to want to like not trust our intuition or trust those little like light bulbs that are going off in us. I feel like when you are called to do something or being called to explore something, that's there for a reason. And whether that thing becomes something massive or it's just the tunnel that gets you through one season to the other, if we don't explore those things as they're coming up, they're going to come through in another way. And you really you have the power to lessen your suffering by listening to those intuitive hits. Like, I think we are so intuitive, and I think there's something that comes through really strong, especially once we have children. And it also is like the biggest test of like, can you still listen to that intuitive hit and trust what you're being asked to do? Or are you going to like try to silence that out of what you think you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to show up in the world as a mom?
Exactly. And that is going to lead me to my last question for you. Probably my second, but my last question. So what is your and both, and how are you honoring yourself in this motherhood? And I guess part B would be, how do you see that changing?
You know, I think for me, my and both is changing constantly, because I'm ambitious and also like I crave spaciousness. Like I want, which is so challenging in motherhood, like spaciousness and motherhood are just like two words
polar opposites,
seem total opposite to each other. And I don't think I honored or acknowledged that side of my identity so much before kids. I didn't recognize it as much. And I think in some ways I was hiding in my ambitions. If I would just go after all these things, then I could sort of silence that craving for more spaciousness, because it's like, well, I'm too busy to want that. And motherhood sort of forced me to realize I have huge dreams and things that I want to do. And also like I crave a lot of spaciousness, and I crave just like downtime and space with my family where I can just play for the sake of playing and find creativity in the most like mundane moments around the house with my kids. And finding that balance for me where I don't feel guilty for taking spaciousness, that is the biggest, that's a big hurdle that I am trying to sort out right now, because I feel like when I do sort of slow down or pump the brakes and try to not do all the things, even if those things are like in service of my family, like that's another challenge for me of like trying to like be okay with like, hey, there's dishes in the sink and toys all over the place, and it would feel great right now for me on some level. I love spaciousness, like I love things cleaned up and orderly as well, and it would feel great to have that. But can I just like relax into this moment and not feel like my worth is attached to how productive I am and all of the things that I'm doing? Because I feel a lot of guilt when I slow down, when I'm just letting myself, like we talked about, when the kids are napping, if I'm just sitting on the couch zoning out or listening to a podcast while they're napping, sometimes I feel guilty, like, oh, I should go do the laundry or I should go and do the dishes. And so for me right now, really learning to just like be okay with not doing is that's the work that I have to do, because I'm fine with the doing. I can do things all day long. I can start a business and a podcast and a music career and do all these things. And I can start projects all day long and I can start household chores all day long. But can I be okay with just existing and just being and not feel like my worth is attached to all the things that I do? So I don't know if that answered your question or just went off on a total tangent, but I feel like my and both is I'm a mother and I'm ambitious, and also like I want spaciousness and stillness, and I'm trying to find that somewhere in the mix for myself. I'll let you know.
Yeah, let me know how that goes. Let me know how the living room cleanup goes, because there's a reason there. I'm not recording in mine.
Yeah, I'm not there yet, but I'll let you know how it pans out for me.
Yeah, I think that you are definitely in the majority when it comes to like productivity, worth, value, and all of that, and productivity being conjoined twins.
Yeah.
And I think that I hope that we are moving in a direction away from that, but that's a heavy hitter that is, gets pushed on from the beginning all the way through. And then I feel like someone hits the gas pretty hard when it comes to motherhood.
Yeah.
But, well, I really could talk to you all day. I think that, you're like so spot on with being able to communicate about how, the just the ins and outs of it. And, you have to be really self-aware, and you have to really listen to your intuition, and you really have to like keep checking in throughout. So I really appreciate you being on. I really appreciate you bearing with my audio visual snafus.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's been so fun. It's so fun to have the tables turned too, because I'm so used to being the podcast host. And so it's fun to be on the other side of the microphone, so to speak, and to just be your first guest on this show too.
I love it.
An honor, and I feel the same. I could talk to you all day. So this has been so fun.
Well, thank you again for coming. And I mean, I would love to have you come back at some point in time too. It's just, let's keep the conversation going.
Yes. Yes.
All right.